Packard is famous for building some pretty amazing cars in its heyday, but did you know they built something back in the 40s that practically won World War II for the Allies? Hi there, Rick DeBrule with another chapter in the automotive evolution, but today we're evolving with a twist. To honor the anniversary of D-Day, which happened on June 6, 1944, we're going to take a look at how car companies played a very vital role in helping the Allies to win World War II. Now, some things are pretty obvious, like the Jeep, which was built by both Willys and Ford. But there's an awful lot of other military hardware that you might not associate with car makers, including an engine that was critical in the battle to save Europe during World War II. But first, make sure you like and subscribe, and in the comments down below, as always, let me know what I got right, and of course, what I got wrong. There's always something I get wrong. And let me know if you have any other interesting tidbits about how American companies repurposed their factories. Did your parents perhaps work there? Were they a part of the war effort? And I also want your opinion. Which car company had the biggest impact on the outcome of the war? I put a link to a poll in our description down below, and it'll also be at the end of the video as well. After you've heard what each company's accomplished, I want to hear what you think. Which one was most important in helping to win the war? All right, let's start our story by explaining how car companies were not exactly asked to help, they were told. Even before the U.S. was officially a part of the war, President Franklin Roosevelt created something called the OPM, the Office of Production Management. The idea was to come up with a plan of how the U.S. could move from peacetime manufacturing to defense production if they were brought into the war. And after Pearl Harbor, the War Production Board, or the WPB, was created. It was given sweeping legal authority over the nation's industrial life. It directly prohibited non-essential production. It rationed scarce materials, and it prioritized government contracts, as well as assigning production quotas to private enterprises. And for automakers, that meant an end to building cars for civilians and the start of building the equipment needed to win the war. On February 10, 1942, civilian car production officially came to an end, which meant no more new Fords for 4 years. So, what did Ford build? Plenty of things. But one critical part of their wartime production was the B-24 Liberator, an airplane. The B-24 was a 4-engine heavy bomber capable of carrying up to 8,000 pounds of bombs over long distances. It served in Europe, the Pacific, the Mediterranean, and the Atlantic. And while the plane was designed by Consolidated Aircraft, during the war, it was built and assembled at Ford's Willow Run factory in Ypsilanti, Michigan. And I mean not just the engines, the entire thing on a Ford assembly line. The Consolidated B-24 Liberator was one of the most important Allied aircraft in World War II, serving as a long-range bomber, a maritime patrol aircraft, and a submarine hunter, while becoming the most produced heavy bomber in history, with more than 18,000 built. And don't forget, after you've heard what the U.S. automakers accomplished during World War II, I want you to vote on which one you think had the biggest impact. And speaking of big, General Motors' military effort was just like the company. It was massive. They stopped building things like Buicks and turned all their plants into wartime production. GMC manufactured more than 500,000 CCKW 2.5-ton cargo trucks. They were commonly known as the Deuce and a Half. These trucks really became the backbone of Allied logistics. They carried fuel, ammunition, food, and replacement parts, as well as troops across Europe after D-Day. Chevrolet built G506 military cargo trucks, while Cadillac manufactured tanks and tank transmissions. Buick produced aircraft engines. Oldsmobile built automatic cannons and artillery ammunition. Pontiac manufactured anti-aircraft weapons and military components. The sheer volume from GM was extraordinary. The Allied armies that advanced across Europe depended on trucks, and many of those trucks came from General Motors factories. While Ford was building bombers and GM was pumping out trucks, the centerpiece of Chrysler's wartime effort was the Detroit Arsenal tank plant in Warren, Michigan. The Arsenal was one of the most important tank factories during World War II. Using automotive mass production techniques, Chrysler was able to manufacture thousands of tanks for Allied forces. The plant built the M3 Lee medium tank early in the war and later became a major producer of the M4 Sherman tank. And that Sherman tank, well, that became the primary American tank that was used in North Africa, Italy, France, Belgium, Germany, and the Pacific. Through its Dodge division, Chrysler Corporation also produced more than 250,000 rugged WC series military trucks during World War II, including weapon carriers, command vehicles, ambulances, radio trucks, and troop transports. And those trucks, by the way, evolved into the post-war power wagons that are so popular today. And then there was a small car company called Willys, based in Toledo, Ohio. Its contribution? A lightweight and nimble troop mover that became known as the Jeep. It was exactly what the soldiers wanted. Four-wheel drive with a 60-horsepower engine that allowed it to go almost anywhere. It could carry troops, it could tow light artillery, and it could serve as a reconnaissance vehicle. And that's just the beginning. Because military demand quickly exceeded Willis's production capacity, Ford was also brought in. They built identical versions known as the GPW. Together, Willys and Ford produced more than 640,000 Jeeps during the war. And the Jeep, well, it served in every major theater of combat. And General Dwight D. Eisenhower later said that the Jeep was an important part of the Allied victory. When you look at Studebaker's post-war designs, you can see they lean pretty heavily into the aviation theme, like this giant propeller-looking thing on the front of the car, or the aircraft hood ornament up on the hood. But when you find out what they did during World War II, you realize they come by this honestly. Smaller companies, like Studebaker, didn't have the same output as Ford or GM, but to certain parts of the war effort, their contributions were even more important. You see, Studebaker built more than 60,000 Wright Cyclone engines in their Indiana factory. And while that engine had a variety of uses in different aircraft, its biggest impact came from the B-17 Flying Fortress. The Boeing B-17 was the backbone of the American daylight strategic bombing campaign in Europe, attacking factories, oil facilities, transportation networks, and other critical military targets deep inside enemy territory. Its ability to carry heavy bomb loads over long distances helped to weaken Germany's industrial capacity, and it contributed significantly to the Allied victory in Europe. And it was all thanks to engines built by Studebaker. And then there was Packard, known for its luxury automobiles before World War II. Once the war started, Packard shifted to building aircraft engines, specifically the V1650 Merlin. It's basically the American version of that famous Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. Now, I know it's hard to cite any one piece of equipment as being the key to the Allied victory, but there are people who will say that one particular aircraft turned the tide, and it had a Packard engine. I'm talking about the North American P-51 Mustang. Initially fitted with an Allison engine, once it was converted to the Merlin, well, its high-altitude performance was dramatically improved, and that was a turning point in the war over Europe. It was finally able to escort American bombers deep into Germany for the first time with sustained protection. German fighters were forced into continuous combat and dogfights, where they were steadily worn down. And once the Mustang entered the widespread service, well, it helped shift air superiority decisively to the Allies. All thanks to the workers at Packard. And I should probably mention also that Packard built V-12 engines that powered the Navy's patrol torpedo. You remember those, otherwise known as the PT boats. And honestly, there was a lot more, but you get the idea. The factories that once produced family transportation became part of the largest industrial mobilization in history. Of course, in the process, those automobile companies earned billions of dollars in wartime contracts. But they also expanded their manufacturing expertise, and they demonstrated a level of production capacity that astonished both our allies and our enemies. And when peace returned in 1945, those same factories would go back to producing civilian automobiles. But for 4 years, Detroit and the American automobile industry had become something else entirely. They were the arsenal that helped win World War II. All right, now it's time for you to vote. Which car company had the biggest impact on the war effort? Was it Ford's B-24 factory, GM's trucks, Willis's Jeeps, Chrysler's tanks, Studebaker's B-17 engines, Or was it Packard's engines that powered that P-51 Mustang? You can either find the poll in the description down below, or you can click on the link at the end of this video. And as always, thanks for watching the Automotive Evolution.